A new poll shows that nearly half of future Republican primary voters support presidential candidates not named Donald Trump. The poll was conducted by the New York Times and Siena College, and it found that 49% of the voters surveyed would support former President Trump for a third nomination. The greatest threat to that third potential nomination appears to be Florida Governor Ron DeSantis, the only contender in the survey to receive double-digit support from Republicans. Now, joining me now, David Drucker, senior political correspondent for the Washington Examiner. David is also the author of a very good 2021 book entitled In Trump's Shadow: The Battle for 2024 and the Future of the GOP. David, it's great to see you. I know it's just one poll, but it's consistent with other polling data that we've seen. Does this suggest to you that the Republican electorate likely to be there in 2024 has developed something of a fatigue factor with the former president and is looking for alternatives?
You know, Major, as I've traveled around the country and talked to Republican voters while covering the midterm elections for 2022, I have detected some soft spots for President Trump in his armor there, or at least some soft spots in between the armor plates, as I like to say. I think the question is whether or not the Republicans that are planning to run for president, whether or not Trump runs, can exploit those weak points. One of the things I think we should understand is that Republican voters, whatever they think about Trump, really liked his policy agenda and are really grateful, in a sense, for all that they believe he accomplished, that they believe so many presidents before him promised to accomplish, but simply did not. And so one of the reasons he's been able to exist as a major player in the Republican Party, despite having lost the House, the Senate, and the White House on his watch, and then we can get to the whole January 6th discussion and his obsession with unsupported stolen election claims, is because they really believe that from a policy standpoint, he made their lives better and he kept promises that other politicians didn't. Having said all that, there is a desire developing for a fresh face and a fresh leader, somebody who continues the Trump legacy from a policy standpoint, even from the standpoint of fighting people like you and me in the media, fighting the Democrats, et cetera, but that offers somebody a little bit more finesse, maybe, that offers them a little bit more finesse and a little bit less baggage.
Right. And this is a two-tiered process because the poll found, not surprisingly, I think to you or to me, that only 16% of Republican voters surveyed would abandon Trump if he was the 2024 nominee. And I think you have this conversation. I have it with Republicans all the time. I'm maybe looking for an alternative, but if he's the party nominee, knowing that it's either going to be President Biden running in 2024 or someone like that, I will choose Trump and do that happily.
Yeah, politics these days is so tribal. It's really shirts and skins games for a lot of voters. Well, my nominee may have all sorts of problems, but no matter what, anything's better than the other guys. And there are not a lot of voters who will look at misbehavior and misdeeds and decide that you're disqualifying. Now, they're in a general election way of looking things, right? If we look at Trump as a general election nominee versus either Joe Biden or whoever the Democrats nominate in 2024, those 16% or 9% or 5% or 12% could be the difference between winning and losing in a general election. But because Trump has enjoyed a real high floor among the Republican base, and because politics is not like it was 30, 40 years ago, because it's so much of us versus them, and I see this on the left as well as the right, it's just not as simple as saying, well, if he's nominated, he loses. He very well could win. And I think it's important for us to understand from both the standpoint of, is Trump losing steam in the Republican Party, or could Trump do it again in the Republican Party? It depends on how you look at polling. What are the conditions at the time? Who are the choices presented to voters? How does a campaign unfold? I've said this quite a bit in discussing In Trump's Shadow. There's a case for Republicans that will run against Trump for the 24 nomination if he runs to make, but if they don't run against him and they don't make the case, they're not going to even really pose the question to Republican primary voters. Voters are not simply going to decide on their own, enough with Trump, I think we'll go with the other guy. I think a Republican is going to have to take it from him And it remains to be seen whether any of them are going to be willing to go at him the way he goes at them.
So that tees up our next question, David. The poll indicates, as others have, that for the moment, Florida Governor Ron DeSantis, who is preparing his own re-election campaign and greeting and having conversations with lots of other Republican governors and sort of trying to build a larger political apparatus around him, may be the person who could take on former President Trump if he so decides. Size that up for our audience, if you'd be so kind.
Well, I think when you look at Governor Ron DeSantis, you have to look at somebody who has been really adept at using the levers of power available to him to affect conservative policy. And so he could make a case in running against Trump that while Trump did a lot of good, there was a lot more good he could have done if he wasn't so caught up in talking about what he thinks and was more focused on doing what he thinks. And Governor DeSantis can contrast his pandemic policy during the coronavirus crisis with that of President Trump's, and it would probably, in the minds of many Republican primary voters, compare favorably. And he could compare other aspects of his record, how he's handled public education in Florida, how he has handled sort of hot-button issues like going after the large technology companies with social media platforms. In some of these cases, what DeSantis has accomplished may not necessarily help him in a general election, and it may be controversial, but it's a lot of what Republicans want to see from their leaders. And what he could say is that he's been able to work within the system rather than constantly beating the system up, such that voters in Florida feel really good about their government and really good about their leadership. And I think that there is a chance that there are a lot of establishment Republicans who don't necessarily like DeSantis all that much, but will say to themselves, this is the kind of Republican that the base wants. And if I don't want Trump to be the nominee in 2024, I can't just get behind the candidate that I like. I have to help a candidate that they like, because that will help us move Trump to the side, giving them somebody that they feel is a great alternative, if not a better alternative. So I wouldn't be surprised to see a cadre of Republican donors who you would expect to support other Republicans that are thinking of running actually say to themselves, DeSantis is my guy. It's just a matter of pure politics. Now, having said all that, how many times, Major, have you and I seen a early front runner, a really early front runner, just fall apart because there's a sense of timing. And the one thing DeSantis has not had to do yet is really run the Republican gauntlet in a primary where he doesn't just get to beat up on Democrats in the media. He's got to fight other Republicans in a multi-state campaign. That's just a whole different ball of wax. And it's not clear that any of them can do it until they do it, but it's certainly not clear that he can do it.
The Washington Examiner's David Drucker, thank you so much for your time.
Thanks, Major.